If something has gone wrong in the world, the chances are someone is trying to fix it. And here on People Fixing the World from the BBC World Service, we find the people who are trying to do just that. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
You land on this island, which is very much your own personal and safe space to retreat to, and then just feeling whatever's there in the moment. It's about being okay with not being okay in a place where nobody's going to judge you and nobody is coming after you with, oh, how are you doing and can I help you somehow?
Henry was still a teenager when his father died from cancer 2 years ago. He struggled to cope because he didn't know anyone else his age who understood what he was going through. But he found an outlet for his grief somewhere you might not expect. The island he's talking about isn't a real one. It's the virtual world of a free game he downloaded on his mobile phone.
It was just a nice atmosphere being created, this little fantasy world to flee in.
People fixing the world.
Welcome to People Fixing the World from the BBC World Service with me, Daniel Gordon. This is the programme that finds creative and unexpected solutions to some of the planet's problems. Today, I'm finding out whether video games can help improve young people's mental health. The World Health Organization says 10 to 20% of young people in the world may have conditions such as depression or anxiety. Several studies have shown that the cause can be something like the loss of a parent at a young age, like what happened to Henry, who you just heard from. He was away travelling when his father died. He went home to Germany for the funeral, but then flew back to Japan, where he had to deal with the grief on his own.
I didn't have my friends around me, I didn't have my family. There was nobody I could really talk to in a sense, especially in the younger years. Death is not a normal topic. Bereavement is something that just does not occur as frequently. So it's not an experience people share. It's something that is so far out that people often don't even have a picture of what it could be like. And since all my life I've been playing games in one form or another, and it's just something I was automatically looking for to kind of deal with my issues in my own style and pace. It just feels much more intuitive. Perhaps not just for me, but also for people of my generation, that you do it through an app.
Searching online, he found something called A Part of Me. In this game, you play a cartoonish character who lands on an island where gentle music plays and everything is a soothing pastel colour. You're then guided, mostly in text, through some of the different emotions that surface when you're grieving. Some of the other figures you meet as you go around give you quests to carry out, like to share a happy memory about the person who's died. As you progress, you win experience points and can move up a level. I got Henry to show me one of his favourite features.
This is coming to the place I want to show you, which is really important for me.
This looks like some kind of cave we're entering.
Exactly, that's what we call the cave, and it's just a little interface basically. A place where we have a bookshelf, and in this bookshelf we basically have audio books in the form of diaries. And these are from many of our guides who recorded their story. And just to go into one of them.
2 weeks before he died, we got taken into the hospice. My dad got moved into a hospice, and he took us in the room with my mum, and they just said, like, you have to say goodbye. And then also I saw him cry, so that's when I realised how real it was, because he didn't ever cry.
And then you just got a little case study here with a drawing of the person. You get to know who they lost, and it's just really a blessing to hear other people talk about their experiences, because it just gives you a sense that you're not alone.
I'm proud of where I am today, and I think my dad would be really proud of where I am. You know, last week I was sat in my bed all day crying, and that was okay, because, you know, you're allowed to feel down sometimes.
Now, this kind of therapeutic experience might not be what comes to mind when you think about gaming. In my family, it sounds less like that and more like this.
Alright, monsters, time to come off.
What am I playing?
Now it's time to turn off.
I just finished this.
That's what goes on in my brother's house. You can probably imagine what happens next. It's not long before it gets to, "Stop wasting your time! Go out and get fresh air instead!" But for Louis Weinstock, the child psychotherapist who's behind A Part of Me, we need to stop thinking so negatively about video games.
We know that young people are spending ever-increasing amounts of time online and on their digital devices. Some of that time is spent less productively, but it's the space that they occupy, it's the space that they are very comfortable with.
He says games are an obvious way to provide emotional support to young people who might need it. Not surprisingly, they find the concept of games more accessible than conventional face-to-face therapy.
They are way more comfortable than if you can imagine being a young person coming into a room with a person they've never met before and being expected to feel comfortable about talking about their deepest, sort of darkest feelings.
Is it safe for any child to just go off and play this who might have been recently bereaved? I mean, it might trigger things that they're not ready for.
Basically, it's safe for young people, but we do have lots of sort of references both on the website and in the game whenever we think something might be about to occur that could be triggering. We don't recommend that any child who's under 11 uses it on their own.
A Part of Me is produced by a charity and it's clocked up 90,000 users in 4 languages, English, German, Italian and Spanish, with more translations planned. So there's obviously a market for it. But in my mind, I still couldn't quite square it with the kind of high adrenaline video games I was used to seeing people play, which are all about the feel-good dopamine hit your brain gets when you win. There's none of that with A Part of Me.
With grief, there isn't really a winning. And whilst we wanted to use some of the sort of techniques that games use to create engagement, which are typically some of the reward structures and the sort of, you could say, the sort of dopamine eliciting techniques, we didn't want to use too many of those at all because being too dopamine activated doesn't help you to grieve. Grief generally tends to be a messier, non-linear process, and people get triggered in their grief by certain events. So you might have the anniversary of a loved one and you feel like you go back into your grief. But that doesn't mean that you're a failure because you've done that. That's just the nature of grief. It's normal. So as much as possible, we've tried to factor that into the design of the game. And so instead of a linear progression, getting better and better and going to the next levels and ultimately winning, you can go up, but then you might go down a bit, but you've got a better vantage point. You're not going necessarily back down to the bottom where you started.
In the gaming industry, A Part of Me is what's known as a serious game, one with a purpose other than pure entertainment. It's a corner of the market which experts say has huge unexploited possibilities when it comes to mental health.
For young people, it still hasn't even come close to being harnessed, this potential.
Isabella Granick is a developmental psychology professor who's developed several serious games. She's the head of GemLab. That stands for Games for Emotional and Mental Health, which is based at Radboud University in the Netherlands. A few years ago, she and her team used her own twin boys to test out a game called Mindlight that her team designed to help children with anxiety.
Listen to your breathing. Just listen to your breathing.
You play it on a computer, but you also have a headset or helmet that measures brain waves and can sense a child's anxiety levels and triggers a response in the gameplay.
You walk into this game world and you put on this helmet and you learn that as you get calmer, the light grows bigger. As you get more anxious, the light becomes darker. And the only way you can walk through this haunted house is to stay calm because that's the only way you can see where you're going, right?
The game provides other challenges too, such as learning to stay calm when monsters that look like spiders approach you.
So if you stay calm, then the monsters stay away. But as soon as you get anxious, as they come at you, they can get you. And if they get you 3 times or whatever it is, you have to start all over.
Isabella's team have run several randomised control trials on the game, and they say they've demonstrated that Mindlight can be as effective as face-to-face therapy. But for her, that's not even the most important measure of success.
What actually really convinced me of Mindlight's effectiveness was one night when, in the middle of the night, I heard screams from my kids' bedroom. And so they share a bedroom when they were 8 years old. And I ran up there, and before I opened the door, what I heard was Reuben. So Julian was the one that had screamed, and Reuben, his brother, was saying, Julian, hush, relax, use your mind light. So Julian had woken up from a nightmare, had been screaming. And Reuben, first kind of way to help him was to say, use your mind light, use it. So the metaphor from the game was clearly transferring to the real world context automatically, like this is the middle of the night, but I still get goosebumps remembering it.
You may be wondering then why Mindlight and the other games Isabella's worked on aren't household names if they deliver what the research shows. In truth, no one's actually playing them. And she says the main reason is money.
What's stopping you achieving what you're trying to achieve?
So it's investors that would put money in, and this is anywhere between 1 to 3 million is the cost that we have figured out, only to iterate, for example, Mindlight once, because it was done 7 years ago at this point. By the time all the randomized controlled trials are finished, etc., you've got a piece of software that doesn't run on half the computers out there, more than half the computers out there, right? They're old. So it needs to be iterated. And then there are things like marketing and distribution costs. And I'm so frustrated by the fact that we've been so successful scientifically, and yet real world impact still is lagging.
This is where we hit a widely recognised problem in the production of games like the ones I've been talking about.
The reason why, until relatively recently, not much has happened in this space is that you need a lot of money and you need scientists and therapists and games developers talking to each other to do this well.
Peter Etchells is a professor of psychology and science communication at Bath Spa University in the UK, and he's the author of a book about what video games can do for us. He agrees with Isabella that it's hard to match the funding and the right expertise.
If you don't do that, what you end up with is something that kind of looks like a game, but is basically a scientific experiment or as an attempt at a therapy intervention. And it looks a bit naff, really. Particularly people who play video games. If you say, hey, look at this game, it's designed to do such and such, then they won't see it as a game.
But he says something interesting is happening in commercial game design. More and more games are emerging which explore human emotions like grief and get played because people find them therapeutic, even though they were never designed with that intention in mind.
The specific intent of the game is not to provide people with a therapy or of a way of working through a loss, say. But